Welcome to Valente Brothers TV. Once again, we're here in the beautiful city of North Miami Beach. And today we're going to talk about the contributions of our father, Grandmaster Pedro Valente, to this amazing art and to the amazing story of Jiu-Jitsu in Brazil, in the United States. Professor Pedro, let's start from the beginning. How did this all happen?
This actually started with our grandfather, Dr. Cilo Gomes Valente. He was born in the state of Ceará in the northeast of Brazil, and he moved to Rio to study medicine. One of his classmates in medical school was Japanese, and he was a black belt in Judo/Jiu-Jitsu, and he was the first one to teach our family the art of Jiu-Jitsu. Our grandfather took a few lessons from him.
Well, following that, we know that our father began training in 1951, you could say?
Around there.
Officially,
yes.
In a school. And how did that happen? I believe he began training judo first, right?
Yes, they watched the Kimura fight, and after that, our grandfather took him to a local school in Copacabana, the Cordeiro Academy, and that's where he started training judo.
And why was it that our grandfather, Dr. Cilo Valente, believed Jiu-Jitsu was so important for our father?
That was a story that my dad would always tell, that based on his last name, he was bullied in school. My dad was someone who was small, frail, and my grandfather took my father to train so that he could learn and gain more confidence, so that if he was picked in school and people were trying to bully him by words or physically, he could defend himself.
Now, our last name is Valente. Valente. In English is brave. So often, as he would tell us the stories, kids would ask him, "Are you really brave?" And even though our grandfather taught him to respond, "No, it's just a name," of course, as a young child who had that very combative nature, instinctual, he ended up having many fights, and because of that, Jiu-Jitsu had a great impact in his life and in his ability to control his emotions. Following that, let's talk a little bit about how he grew up training Jiu-Jitsu and his first experiences in the Gracie Academy.
Yeah, as a teenage, he was always at the Academia Gracie, because after the judo experience for a few years, then he joined in 1953 together with his father. Father and son joined the Academia Gracie, and he was always there. It improved his nutrition. It had a real impact not only on how he was able to defend himself, but also on his life in general. And he even fought one time representing the Academia Gracie in one of the undercard fights of Carson Gracie. He fought and he won representing the school.
Yeah, and even though he was a medical student and at the time trying to get into Rio's best medical school, he was selected by Grandmaster Hélio to fight in this event. Joaquim, talk to us about how that fight happened and some of the details of that event.
Basically, he wasn't expecting to participate in that event. And as my brother Gui said, he was caught by surprise. He went one time to the school. They were practicing for the event, and my dad was told by Grandmaster Hélio, he was asked if he wanted to participate in the sparring session before the event, and my dad said, "Oh, for sure, I will do it." And based on his performance, Grandmaster Hélio was very happy and said, Saturday, I think it was Saturday, you're up to fight in the event. My dad said, "Oh, but I'm in the middle of exams, I'm studying a lot, you're ready." My dad said, "For sure, I'm up for it."
Yeah, and the very interesting thing that happened in the fight was that after the first round, our father was very tired, and his corner man was Grandmaster João Alberto Barreto. Grandmaster Hélio was sitting front row, and as he sat down in the corner trying to regain his energies, Grandmaster Hélio noticed that, stood up from his seat in the front row, approached the corner, and told my father, "Pedrinho, your opponent is a lot more tired than you are. Go back there and do your job." And what happened?
He choked him. He choked him from the guard and won that match. that was a highlight in his jiu-jitsu career.
Exactly. So I believe that when we talk about my father's contributions to Jiu-Jitsu, there is a few things that happened after that that are very, very important. My father, of course, began studying, became a doctor, and after a few years, he moved to the United States, to Europe, and what happened?
And he was working on his postgraduate studies, working with some very famous doctors. And during that time, he was focused on his career, and he was away from Jiu-Jitsu. He did not practice while he was abroad. And interestingly, this happened in the 1960s. That's when the federation was established and Jiu-Jitsu changed direction. It started being practiced more as a sport. This transformation occurred gradually, but my father was not there. So when he went back to training at the Academia Gracie, he saw a big difference, a big change in the focus.
The late 60s, early 70s, and that focus was not only at the Academia Gracie, but Jiu-Jitsu around Rio de Janeiro especially, and that connection that he was able to make is really maybe one of the single most important contributions that he made, because he noticed the difference. And at that moment, eventually, he was very much interested in having his son, his first son, practice the Jiu-Jitsu that he had learned. I think that began a process in the talks between him and Grandmaster Hélio.
Not only the Jiu-Jitsu that he had learned, but the Jiu-Jitsu that he saw Grandmaster Hélio Gracie practice and execute as a fighter, and Grandmaster Carson Gracie. My father was around when Grandmaster Hélio Gracie was training Grandmaster Carson Gracie, because Carson was only a few years older than our father. And so he realized that Carson was very good with the striking techniques, Carson was very good with the throwing techniques, and that was a big part of the way they trained. And so he wanted us to learn the stand-up elements of Jiu-Jitsu as much as the ground elements. And I think that as he realized that there was this huge focus on the ground and that the stand-up techniques of Jiu-Jitsu were not being practiced, he wanted us to learn, and he started having conversations with Grandmaster Hélio that I think were key in the development of the Jiu-Jitsu that we practice today.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things that happened was, I'm not sure if in the late 60s or just in the early 70s, when our father opened up his first clinic, and right next to Grandmaster João Alberto's school. João Alberto Barreto had left the Gracie Academy, opened up his own school, and our grandfather began having classes with Grandmaster João Alberto Barreto.
Yeah, he had stayed a while also without practicing during this exact period that my dad was traveling. And then my father encouraged him, why don't you go back to train? The school is right next to my practice. And so in the first few days, my father realized that they had signed up our grandfather to participate in a tournament. And our father was not too happy with that. He said, I don't want my father to be training Jiu-Jitsu to compete in a tournament. He's 60 years old. He's here to practice his self-defense, to train something that's positive.
At the time, in an open division.
There was no age brackets.
Yeah, and our father never, and this is something very important, our father never practiced himself, and that was never his objective when he introduced us to Jiu-Jitsu, to have us be professional Jiu-Jitsu athletes. For him, Jiu-Jitsu was a big part, a very important part of our education.
Absolutely.
Going to school was another part. Education was another part.
And touching on the education part, Jiu-Jitsu is one of the only things that my dad, I would say the only thing that my dad would compare to the same as going to school. Going to school is extremely important always for him, but Jiu-Jitsu was together because he believed that that was the physical confidence, right? School would give you the intellectual confidence, and Jiu-Jitsu gives the physical confidence that he thought it was in the same level of importance.
And talking exactly about this point, education, Jiu-Jitsu confidence, intellectual confidence, how did that then affect Valente Brothers, the development of our school?
Well, all of our programs are designed for that. For example, our children's class. We use elements of child psychology, the most innovative techniques when it comes to raising the self-esteem of children, combined with what we learned in our practice of judo. Judo has some great drills and exercises for that, and we use some of that in our classes. Everything that we learned from Grandmaster Hélio with respect to children's psychology, he was a master in that. And so our classes are designed mainly, not just for children, but for adults, to raise people's self-esteem. That's something that all of us should work on all the time. And Jiu-Jitsu is one of the most amazing tools, psychological tools, to be able to raise students' self-esteem. And our programs are specifically designed for that.
Our father became a very prominent plastic surgeon. At one point he was selected by the New York Times magazine as one of the 5 most successful plastic surgeons in the world. He was Secretary of Health of the state of Rio de Janeiro. He was in charge of the medical department. He was a vice president of the club Vasco da Gama, one of the most important football clubs in the world, most traditional clubs in the world. And he often credited all that to Jiu-Jitsu. And why is that, Professor Joaquim?
The main one that comes to my mind is the person who taught him plastic surgery. You know, his mentor was a student of the Academia Gracie, a student at the time that he started there at his young age, and someone who he met in there and motivated him to be the great plastic surgeon that he was. I think Professor Pedro can elaborate a little bit more.
Yes, Jorge da Silva was his mentor, and on top of that, the great confidence that he got from the practice of Jiu-Jitsu, to be a doctor, to be in charge of an operating room, that requires confidence. And he said that his personality was shaped by Jiu-Jitsu and by the great examples that he had at the Academia Gracie.
Yeah, because our father, as we said already, the only time in his life that maybe he was not putting on the kimono to practice Jiu-Jitsu was the times in the 1960s when he was living in the United States and in Europe, continuing his studies and even working in the medical field. However, our father often said, and this is something that we really work hard to teach here at Valente Brothers, he always practiced Jiu-Jitsu, not just on the mat, but especially off the mat,
Yes.
right? It was a very famous saying of his that even when he was tying his shoes, he would be using Jiu-Jitsu. So I think that that's really some of the most important contributions as well that he made to Jiu-Jitsu, and especially that motivated us to build what we have today.
Yeah.
When we came to the United States, the plan was not for us to be Jiu-Jitsu instructors, right? But we chose that profession. It happened gradually and naturally, especially first with you, then as I came, and then when Joaquim came. But Grandmaster Hélio taught us from a very early age. And it was through this combination of Grandmaster Hélio and our father, Grandmaster Pedro Valente Sr., that today we were able to build Valente Brothers and our training programs. But why don't we go back a little bit in time and also remind our friends of something that happened in, I believe, the 1980s, when the Academia Gracie from Avenida Rio Branco moved to the South Zone, to the Zona Sul of Rio de Janeiro, because that was also very important.
Yes, the high point of the Academia Gracie in downtown Rio was in the 1950s. Then the demographic changed, and for different reasons, the Sul got smaller. They used to be in the 17th and the 18th floor, but then the 17th floor became something else, and the school became much smaller. So our father did something which was very important. He helped move the Academia Gracie from downtown to the south zone of Rio, which is where everything was happening basically in the city of Rio de Janeiro, and that allowed them to grow. First it was in the Vasco da Gama football club, one of their
Rowing club?
the rowing club. Then they moved to the Estádio de Remo, which was a government building for also rowing. Stayed there for a few months.
This is all in the Lagoa, right? The big
Lagoa.
lagoon, for those of you that have been to Rio de Janeiro.
And then they moved in the south zone. They met the Werneck family, owners of the school Padre Antonio Vieira, and they moved to Maitá, where Master Holker is still teaching Jiu-Jitsu today.
Any final considerations?
The final thought, and I think this is an important contribution, as I said earlier, from our father, is how today at Valente Brothers, stand-up Jiu-Jitsu is a big part of what we do. He encouraged us as we were growing up, all three of us, with the knowledge of Grandmaster Eddie Gracie, to train in boxing so that we could learn how to fight standing up. He encouraged us to train in judo so that our throwing techniques and our takedowns were very well practiced, and obviously the ground and the stand-up self-defense against surprise attacks. That's what he saw Carson Gracie do, Eddie Gracie do in the old days. That's what he learned when he was training, and because Jiu-Jitsu changed after the 60s, he wanted to make sure that we were getting that complete style. Because of that, and because of his conversations with Grandmaster Eddie, today at Valente Brothers, we teach our students a complete fighting system. We have striking technique classes, we have throwing technique classes, we have a complete system, a huge emphasis on self-defense. Everything we do 100% for self-defense and for personal development, and this comes from our father.
And that was one of the things that made my dad the most proud in the end of his life, was to be here and to see kids from a young age, starting from 3 years old, all the way to our most elderly students, train that complete system of martial art. As my brother said, you know, we do Jiu-Jitsu as a complete system, and that's something I think that really, you know, marks what Valente Brothers is.
Well, thank you, and I believe that in closing we should thank some of our teachers that helped us throughout this journey. Of course, the Gracie family through Grandmaster Helio, and many members of the family. We had many private classes with Grandmaster Royler Gracie.
Master Royler Gracie.
Master Royler Gracie. And, very quickly, Sérgio Sano,
Yes.
Ney Wilson, Osvaldo Simões, Rafa Giglio,
Yes.
and everyone else, all our training partners that helped us so much throughout our lives. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.